everyone, good morning. I am really happy to be here and really happy to see all of you and discuss one of my favorite topics in the world, another place in Etzion. This topic, I'm happy you're all here for the first week. This topic there's so much to say in different angles. It's going to go over a series of 3 weeks. Of course, if you miss a week, you don't have to have been at the previous one to understand because I review, but I'm excited for all of us to be here at the beginning. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Let's say someone came up to you and said, you have the opportunity to start a new community in Israel. Here's a map, pick. Where do you want to go? How are you deciding where to settle? Are you deciding based on location? Maybe you want to be in the north, the south, the middle. Do you want to be near the beach? Scenery, you want to be on a mountaintop? Weather, you want it to be hotter or cooler, which is just how amazing that all of these you can get in Israel. You could pick whatever you want and get it all in one little tiny country. Do you want to be in a more historical place? Do you want to be in a place that has a Tanakh connection? There are a lot of considerations in deciding where you want to settle. So in 1927, there was a group of Haredim from Mea Shearim and a group of Yemenite Jews, and they said, how could it be that there's no settlement in between Yerushalayim and Hebron? You have Yerushalayim more up north over here and Hebron down south. And all of this was Arab villages. There was no Jewish settlement. And they said, we need something in between. So they decided to start a settlement over here called Kfar Etzion. Later on, it was called Kfar Etzion. They called it Migdal Eder. And the reason why they did that is they said when Yaakov was traveling in Eretz Yisrael, right after he buried Rachel in Bethlehem, he stopped in a place called Migdal Eder. Let's copy him. Let's do the same thing. And they made their new town in between Yerushalayim and Hebron. They called it Migdal Eder. Did they succeed? Was this a thriving, successful yeshuv? That's one of the things we are going to answer today. Today, we are going to be looking at an area in Israel called Gush Etzion. A lot of people are familiar with this area. They just to name yeshuvim that are part of it, Efrat, Alon Shvut, Elazad. If you have family or no friends that live there, that's all part of this area. You see from the picture how beautiful it is, a lot of vineyards, and it's nice place to be, and that's where we are going to focus today. Also, I will mention it's very appropriate that we're studying this area and reading Sefer Bereshit because the Avot and Imahot spent a lot of time in this area. We said Yaakov, after he buries Rachel, he's in this area. Abraham Avinu spent time in Hebron, right? We just read Menat HaMachpelah, Parashat Chayei Sarah. So it's very meaningful to be in an area where the Tanakh happened. And when we opened up with and said, how are you choosing where to settle? Well, the group that I mentioned said, we want to pick the Tanakh, and that's where we want to settle. One of the questions we are going to answer is, what were the 4 attempts to settle in Gush Etzion? How did the UN's partition plan affect the residents of the Gush? And what was the last battle for the Gush? So to, again, remind us where we're talking about, we have Yerushalayim, Hebron. This area in the middle is what we want to settle. So this group of people, they said, let's settle here between Yerushalayim and Hebron. They name it Migdal Eder after Yaakov naming where he stuck Migdal Eder. Did they succeed? No. Why not? Because in 1929, the Arabs rioted and they were too isolated and didn't have proper defense. And they said, we just have to scrap this idea. Not going to work this time. Okay. Then we have another attempt. In the 1930s, there was this German man whose last name was Holtzman. And Holz in German means tree. So they named what he was trying to establish Kfar Etzion, Etzion from the word Etz, the translation of his name. And his idea was he wanted to create this and cool. He said this would be great for a retreat. If someone wants to sit and introspect, if someone wants to be healthier, it's a great place to be. And he had a health clinic over there, which also serviced the non-Jews. However, in 1936, the Arabs rioted, even though this clinic that he built also helped them, and they had to leave the project. So we keep trying to settle this important area, but it's not working. And then we have another attempt. In the 1940s, there's a group of Jews from Poland, and they say, we want to live in Israel. And they speak to the Jewish agency, and the Jewish agency says, we have a great area for you. And they say, the area we have, why don't you go to Migdal Eded, Gush Etzion? And they say, no, if people tried twice to settle it and it didn't work, must not be the greatest area. But we'll send out a delegation similar to the Meragilim. We'll scout out the land, we'll see how it is. So a group of Jews from Poland sent people, and they look at the land and the mountains, and they say, wow, this is really an amazing area for hiking, not for living. It's great, we want to do it to you all. That's what it's for. It's not appropriate for living. And they tell the Jewish agency, we're not interested. And they have 4 reasons why. 1, water. There's no natural sources of water. Maybe the Arabs could sell us water, but they're not interested in that. We're dependent solely on the rain, which is too scary for us. Another challenge is the land. They said this is very, very rocky land. We need to focus on agriculture. And how are we going to work the land if there's too many rocks? We're not going to make it. Also the climate. Yeah, its air is nice and crisp and clean, but in the winter it's freezing and there's tons of snow. Even till today in the winter, when it snows, tons and tons and tons in that area. We don't want to live there. And the 4th, it's dangerous. Okay, so we'll have a guard who's scouting out and being a lookout, but the guard can't possibly look in every single direction at the same time to make sure there's no Arabs coming. We don't want to settle, and that was their conclusion. So the Jewish agency, they don't accept it so quickly. They say, but maybe you guys are just the people to take on this mission. 2 other groups failed, but who says that you will? We think you should try it. So they say, no, let's discuss it amongst ourselves. And they have a vote. And at the vote, 58 people vote in favor and 29 vote against and say we don't want to settle. However, this was not enough because one of the rules that they set out in advance was that there needs to be 2/3 majority. And that's not 2/3 majority. It's very, very close, but it's not what they need. And then the man running the meeting said, wait a minute, I didn't vote. And he votes in favor of settling the land. They have the 2/3 majority that they need. And they decided in 1943, let's try a 3rd time to settle this area. The area that they start a kibbutz. Wait, hold on. Okay. They start a kibbutz Kfar Etzion, and it's really doing well. The people are having a nice life, and it does so well that they establish another one after, another area called Masuat Yitzchak, and then they establish another area of living in Surim, and then another one, Kibbutz Revadim. And these towns are all near each other. It's doing so well. Life is good, it's hard, but working. And I just want to tell you some jokes that they have from the time. We mentioned earlier that the land is very rocky. So the joke is, instead of them saying Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, they say Hamotzi lechem min hasela, he who takes bread out of the rocks, because literally we're getting the bread from the rocks. And in order for a settlement to succeed, and this is true of any place, what you need is a future. You need future generations, you need children. So it's all nice that they're there and settling the land, but if they don't have children, it's not going to continue. And they have children, and there are many children born there that are playing. I'll also mention that a lot of the people that were working in the land were Holocaust survivors, which is so incredible that the Holocaust is over, and they come and they're working the land, and it's like what a jump from what they went to, what they were going through, and now what they're dealing with. And it's really like very exciting for them, new opportunity, very meaningful to them. Think of how much they've gone through in their lives from one end to the next. And now I want to discuss what were some of the beliefs that kept them growing, because all the challenges that the group of Polish Jews identified beforehand, they still exist. It's still dangerous. The weather is still kind of stinky. It's still rocky. There's still not a lot of water, but I want to share with you some of the feeling from the time. So there's something called Megillat Netiyah, the Megillah of the planting, written by a man living there named Shalom Kadniah. So I want to read with you what he wrote. So he says, 1 year after our Aliyah to Kfar Etzion, we want to plant fruit trees to keep what it says in the Torah, Ki tavo el haaretz umtatem. So we say first off that they are connected to the Torah. He says in the Torah it says to come to Israel and plant, and that's what we want to do. We came here to build and plant and set roots in the hills of Yehudah, because in this planting is a new opening to our Geulah and our redemption. We're detached in the Golah, and this detachment was our biggest sickness. That he's saying the fact that we weren't living in Eretz Yisrael, we all came from places that weren't Eretz Yisrael. We were not connected, and it's a type of sickness to not be fully connected to Eretz Yisrael. And he continues and says, we need roots to grasp strongly to our homeland, and this is what we are doing in this place. And he sees a simple act of planting a tree as something so meaningful. The trees that we are planting today are going to be a symbol for us, a symbol for our journeys as pioneers of the nation, a sign for our covenant with our homeland, as it says, Ki ha'adam etz hasadeh. The deep roots of these trees will remind us of our obligation to be connected to the world of action and doing through building, planting, and work. The high branches that will be raised to the sky will awaken us towards the one above, to know our Creator and to always strive for ethics and wholesomeness and the sanctity of life. This was the way of our forefathers, and this is the way of our pioneers of Torah and work. Baruch shechianu v'kimanu v'gianu lezeman hazeh. I think it's so nice how he, other than planting the trees that you're rooting down in the ground, he sees it symbolic also that the tree is growing and reminding you to look up towards God and be partner with God. And this is one person writing on behalf of the Yishuv what he feels. And this is reflective of what the sentiment was in the Yishuv. And I love reading these kind of things because it shows what passion some people live with. And I remember 13 years ago when I spent a year in Israel, I was by someone's house for Shabbat. And we were talking and she said, how do you live in America? Because in America, the land and the air means nothing. And then I was like, wait, you mean you could live in a place where something so basic as air and land could mean something, and it could add another dimension to your life. And here, Shalom Kadniah is connecting to that, and every minute of his life is infused with meaning because he's living in Eretz Yisrael, and he's very grateful to be living here. This is a picture of him sitting on the rocks of the Gush, writing away. So keep him in mind. He's going to be important next week, but I'll remind you again of him. So we asked, what were the 4 times to sit on Gush Etzion? So far, we didn't do 4 yet. We did 3, and the 3rd one is working so far. I want to focus now on the next question. How did the UN's partition plan affect the residents of the Gush? As we said, life is very tough, but very meaningful. 2 earlier failed attempts. This one is succeeding. And then November 29th, 1947, the UN gives approval. They say we're going to partition Palestine and make Israel a state. And as is known, the Jews are so excited. There's tons of pictures and video footage from the time that they're out in the streets, they're singing and dancing, and they say, yay, we're going to have a state. The Arabs are very upset with it, but the Jews are thrilled. However, there is a problem. If we look at what the plan was, so everything in orange was supposed to go to the Arabs, and in green is supposed to go to the Jews. And you see over here, the blue dot, this is Gush Etzion. Gush Etzion and 24 other Yeshuvim were going to be in the Arab state based on the UN's plan. Now, what does it mean for someone living in Kibbutz Kfar Etzion, where he just heard on the radio that he's living in what's going to be an Arab state? Does he stay? Does he leave? Is there another option? Do they try to make peace? The Jews living there never really had to answer that question because the next day, November 30th, 1947, the War of Independence broke out. And they got the answer. They said, okay, a war. We're staying because you never know how a war is going to end. So let's see what ends up happening. But it was a real question and it was scary for them that they're on the wrong side of the fence. And here's a picture from that time period. I want you to notice that they have guns over here and it blends in a bit with their hair, but they're wearing tefillin and they're wearing talitot. And these were the people fighting on one hand and praying to God on the other hand. And this was their connection to God was something that infused the spirit and the fighting. So this is a picture from that time period. The War of Independence can also be called a war of roads, because the way the war, what was important in the war, and in order to win, you needed to have control of the roads. The highways were very, very narrow, which is hard to picture because now you drive in Israel and the roads are not all, but the highways are pretty wide. And back then, whoever controlled the road, they controlled the war, because they could see who's coming, who's going. And Gush Etzion was kind of isolated. We mentioned earlier that they had all Arab towns around them. And the only way they could survive is if Jews from Hebron or Jews from Yerushalayim would come and bring them supplies, medicine, food, whatever they needed. Now, they couldn't just come in a car because they would get shot. So they would come in something called a convoy, which was an armored vehicle, and they would get shot anyway. But at least they're more protected. And this is something really important to keep in mind about the battle, and keep in mind for next week as well. So there's a very famous story of a convoy that went out from Jerusalem to Gush Etzion on December 11th, 1947. It said, our friends in the Gush are in trouble. We need to help them. And anyone going out is going with personal risk to themselves, because they know that there's nothing guaranteeing that they're going to get there peacefully. And unfortunately, the convoy is attacked and 10 people are killed. And the convoy is then known as Shayeret Asara, the convoy of the 10. One of the people that was killed in this convoy was Shalom Karniel. We mentioned him, we said he wrote a beautiful poem about planting and being connected to your roots, and he was killed in this convoy. Another convoy, and we're going to talk about, they have a fantastic story, a fantastically sad story, but we're going to talk more about the story next week. There's 40 men, they ignore the 40. That was the original plan. But anyway, another convoy, they're setting out to Gush Etzion. They don't make it either. And they see that it's not really going well, but there's no other option because they need to help the people of the Gush. And the Gush is getting really, really dangerous. And then the men and the women, they start discussing among themselves, what should be done with the women and children? What do you mean what should be done? They should continue living there. Or should they continue living there? Because the amount of supplies is very, very limited as it is. And the fewer people there are, the better, because they could have more supplies. Now, women and children need to eat as well. But if they're not there, then the men would get more food. And the children, they can't really help with defense. Maybe they're just a liability. And the women did actually help with the fence, but the women also need to take care of the children. So the people are discussing, and they say maybe it's better, even though all of Israel is not safe, there are areas that are safer. And they discuss among themselves, maybe we should evacuate the women and the children. And they decide that that's what they're going to do. And the women and children, almost all of them were evacuated and sent to Jerusalem. I want to discuss this decision for a minute, but how difficult it would be. You're a woman and you're debating, do you leave your husband and go with your child? You follow your motherly instinct and go to a safer place, but the safer place you're going to is not even guaranteed to be safer. Plus, you're going to be living as a refugee, because it's not like you can have your house. Living as a refugee is not nice and calm and easy. What if you leave your husband and you never ever see him again? Now, maybe you should help fight, because other than there being not enough supplies, there were also not enough hands to hold the weapons and fight. And you believe in settling the land just as much as your husband does, and you want to be a part of it. Maybe you should stay and fight too, and you should put your faith in God's hands that he'll protect you. Whatever decision you make is a really, really difficult one. And ultimately, like we mentioned, most of them did decide to leave, but it was a decision that tore them apart. And we're going to see later on that it had very big consequences. Here's a picture of women that were fighting. And this is a very different image than, I'd say, a typical Jewish woman of the past. A typical Jewish woman of the past is a homemaker. She's cooking, she's taking care of her children. And this picture shows that they had another role as well. And they were very Zionistic. They believed in the state of Israel. And they said, if we're needed to shoot, we'll shoot. If the men are going around the yishuv and we need to do guard duty, we'll do guard duty. And this was another role that the women took on. So it sees how dedicated they were to the continuation of Am Yisrael. Because not only were they fighting to help defend, they also were having children, and they're building Am Yisrael in that way. So they took a really pivotal role in this battle by defending and having children. And this is really a difference from women of the past. Where are we in the story? It's May 1948. The Jews can't travel freely on the roads. The Jordanians have a power base in Hebron, and their goal is set on Yerushalayim. They say, but to conquer Yerushalayim, we have to take care of the bump in the road. There's a settlement of Jews, Gush Etzion. They have some weapons, not so much. We need to take care of them, and then the road is clear to Jerusalem. And how do the Jews of the Gush feel about what's going on? So the feeling among the Jews was that more than they're fighting for Gush Etzion, they're fighting for Jerusalem, because they know that if they fall, Jerusalem is going to fall. And if they're able to stand strong, the chances are Jerusalem will as well. And the nickname that Gush Etzion was giving, and when they would radio back and forth, they would give nicknames, was Hamalka. Jerusalem is the king, and Gush Etzion is the Malka, is the queen. And David Ben Gurion said, if a Jewish Jerusalem exists, the first credit and thanks need to go to the fighters of the Gush, because everyone recognized that they were really helping the defense of Yerushalayim by them existing. It means the Arabs can't get to Yerushalayim that quick because they have to deal with them, and hopefully they'll be able to be successful. However, the day before the state of Israel is declared, on the 4th of Iyar, the Arabs attack Gush Etzion and it falls. And they say on the radio when they're speaking to Yerushalayim, Hamalka nafla, Hamalka nafla. The queen has fallen. They did their absolute best that they could with the very limited means that they had. However, they were no match for the hundreds of Arabs that came and attacked them, and Gush Etzion was no longer a thriving settlement. Now we see the third attempt to settle Gush Etzion failed, and it's always failing for the same reason, are Arabs attacking. The massacre that went on there, 127 people died, killed then. 22 of the 127 people were women. And this is the highest number of women that ever fell in a single battle in all the battles of Israel. Now, usually women are not fighting. If we look at the Israeli army today, it's not common that a woman is a combat soldier. It's the men that take on that role. But in Gush Etzion, they had no choice. They needed the women to fight. And 22 of the women were killed. Most of them were single because the married women went with their children to a safer place in Yerushalayim. Not all of them chose to. There were two moms that said, we're sending our kids. One of them ended up joining her kid and the other one didn't. And now think of what this means. All these families that are divided, now the kids only have one parent. All these women become widows. None of them have their husbands anymore, except for a few lucky people. 4 remained alive, 3 men and 1 woman. And it was a terrible blow, terrible loss. And what happened the day after? So the following day, the people in the nearby Yeshuvim, Masuot Yitzchak and Nevadim and Surim and Nevadim were taken captive. And the following day, the state of Israel is declared. So you can imagine what mixed feelings. On the one hand, extreme elation that we have the state of Israel, and we are Medinat Israel, and this is a very famous picture of David Ben Gurion announcing it. And now we're going to unite all the different factions that are fighting, and we're going to be Israeli army. But they also know that the day before, Gush Etzion is no more. So it's very, very mixed. And I think that's living in Israel in general. You could be at the top of the world, even in the same day, even in your heart. You could have extreme feelings of happiness, and then on the second hand, extreme feelings of sadness. You have Yom HaZikaron, and the next day, Yom HaAtzmaut. So I think this is the story of living in Israel, all these mixed feelings. For the next 19 years, nobody can step foot in the Gush. That's it. It's completely taken over by the Arabs. Until what? Until we will see next week. What is the continuation of the story? We said people live in Gush Etzion today. How did that happen? So that we are going to talk about. Something I would like to mention, add to your list if you've never been there, and even if you have been there, go again. I've been here about 4 times, and I like going back again and again and again. In Gush Etzion, they have something known as the Gush Etzion Visitor Center. And you see how big and spacious and beautiful it is from the picture. What this visitor center is, it's an 1.5-hour movie about what I just described, but in more detail, about the fall of the Gush. The movie, it's on the scary side, and it's about a war. Some war is always scary. And the recommended age, I think, is from children 10 and up. It's really not for little kids. The truth is, a lot of it goes over their heads. They don't even understand, but it's scary for kids to see. And it's a fantastic, fantastic movie. The way it is, and a lot of museums in Israel have this set up. You go into one room and they show you part of the story. You stand up, you go into another room, they show you another part. And it's really, it's so meaningful to watch it. One, because you understand the area better. And two, it's done in a really good way. And three, the reason why I said if you've seen it, go again. And if you haven't, for sure, go. And why I like going again and again. A lot of times, especially in Israel, there's so much history and you get so overwhelmed by stories and details and names, and it's hard to remember it all. And the first time you go, you don't remember it. And the second time, you don't either. But if you're already familiar with the story, then when you see it again, you can begin to pick up on details that you didn't before, because the first time you were so focused on learning the place. So I really, really recommend it. It's a great experience to learn about what we spoke about, the battle more in detail, plus what's coming, we're going to be talking about in the coming weeks. So I'd like to summarize what we discussed today. We opened up with a challenge question to us. We said we're given the task to start a new community in Israel. How are we picking where to go? Said in 1927, there are a group of Jews that said, we want to pick a place to settle based on the Tanakh. How could it be between Yerushalayim and Hebron? There's no settlement. We need to sell the area. And they name it Migdal Eder after Yaakov, named a place. They don't succeed, there's riots. Another attempt in the 1930s, let's make a nice retreat, health clinic, Arab riots, doesn't succeed. Another attempt in the 1940s, we said from the group of Jews of Poland that originally didn't want to go. They said it's good for hiking, not for settling. They end up settling it despite the four challenges of land, water, climate, and danger. We read Megillat HaNeti'ah by Shalom Karniel, who felt really, really connected to what he was doing, and the simple act of planting a tree had a huge meaning for him. We discussed the UN partition plan, where all of a sudden the Jews in Gush Etzion say, hey, we're on the wrong side. We're part of the Arab state. What does this mean for us? And it meant stay put, because the next day war broke out, and there's no way to know how the war is going to go. The war was really a war of the roads. We discussed very shortly how there were armored vehicles, convoys that would come to give supplies to the people here. And even though they're in armored vehicles, the Arabs all surrounding them and shooting them down, they don't have a chance to make it. Some did make it, some didn't make it. Then they made the fateful decision that we must evacuate the women and the children for them to be safer. And the consequence is now you have all these children growing up without dads, all these women having no husbands, but on the flip side, at least they're alive. There were a large amount of women fighters, and the Gush, the people in the Gush felt that we are doing something for Yerushalayim. If we stand strong, it means Yerushalayim has more of a fighting chance. But ultimately, they were attacked, and when they were attacked, they said the queen has fallen. And lastly, I recommend that you go to the Gush Etzion Visitor Center, where you can learn about everything that I told you in a nice, interactive kind of way. Thank you so much for joining. I look forward to seeing you next week, where we will talk about one of the details more in depth. Have a wonderful day.